everybody, Keep 7 Gaming here, back with another Magic the Gathering Arena video, and today we are doing another card discussion, and today we are talking about Ugin the Spirit Dragon. So Ugin the Spirit Dragon is a card I hear a lot of gripe about very frequently. People say that it's a card that's just it's the anti-fun card, and it's just, it's not fun to play against. Why do they even include it? Why did they reprint it? And it's a very polarizing card. I think people either love it or hate it, and I think the people who hate it are kind of like, I don't know. I feel like the people who hate it are playing like aggro decks. I feel like they're playing decks that just lose to an Ugin, so they're frustrated by it. And players who like it are obviously playing against aggro decks and are playing decks that target aggro decks. But there are a lot of ways to play around it. So I guess today's discussion is really, is this card too powerful? Are the players on one side, are the aggro decks or the faster decks that hate seeing this card resolve, are they right? Or are the players that love it and, say it's not overpowered and, it's totally fair, are they right? So to start off, the card is an 8 colorless mana Planeswalker. It has a +2 ability, +2 loyalty ability. Ugin the Spirit Dragon deals 3 damage to target creature or Planeswalker. He has a -X ability, which I think is the most contentious or the most discussed. Not discussed, but like the most, yeah, whatever. So it's the most controversial ability of his. So -X, exile each permanent with converted mana cost X or less that's 1 or more colors. And then he has a -10 ability, his ultimate. You gain 7 life, draw 7 cards, then put up to 7 permanent cards from your hand onto the battlefield, and he starts with a whopping 7 loyalty. So the card in a vacuum is very powerful. I mean, he has a board wipe, he has a bolt, he has a and it's +2. You uptick him for 2, so he goes from 7 to 9 immediately if you use this, and he has a bolt that can attack any target creature or player. So there's a lot of popular cards right now that have 3 toughness or lower, so he can target a lot of different things and get +2 out of it, which is very good. And then his -X is the ability that people hate or love. So it's essentially a board wipe that exiles everything that's converted mana cost X or less. So I think people, again, aggro players have a huge problem with this because it's just so powerful. This can really just end a game. A -3 in a -3 against mono red could be game. I mean, they with no card drawn stuff that could just be over. And then X can be as high as 7, and then he exiles himself, or he kills himself technically, and -7 takes out a lot of things. But you also have to remember, if he has to kind of wipe himself off the board, that's not that great for the player that played him. Paying 8 mana to wipe the board isn't particularly great. But the thing about Ugin, the weird thing about Ugin is every time I play him, I feel like players are able to recover, and every time he's played against me, I feel like I'm unable to recover. But I mean, that's the nature of Magic. It's tough. I don't think that this card is unbalanced. I think that there's a lot of ways to play around this card. I think there are a lot of things that this card can't get rid of or hates to see on a battlefield. Think about things like, an Embercleave. Although it is exilable and you can keep your Ugin the Spirit Dragon on the board, he's got one, he's only got one loyalty left. So if you're playing an Embercleave deck, you better have haste creatures. And if he wipes the board, hopefully you either have one in hand or will draw one. And can get rid of them, and then you're back to having a board advantage. And if they want to take over a board advantage, they have to have another Ugin in hand or some way to kind of interact. So he hates seeing Embercleave. As weird as that sounds, because he can exile it and still remain on the board, it's actually kind of tough because the Ugin player has to downtick him probably a lot more than they would like. Beanstalk Giant. He has to kill himself to get rid of a Beanstalk Giant, and a 9/9 creature on the battlefield is going to be tough to deal with, and obviously can't be killed with his bolt. So Beanstalk Giant, which is popular in the Team of Ramp decks, Embercleave, popular in Gruul, uh, the Great Henge. I mean, the Great, like, he cannot get rid of a Great Henge because the Great Henge is 9 converted mana cost. Regardless of what they paid to get the Great Henge on the battlefield, it is 9 converted mana cost, so he cannot exile it. Obviously, unless he gets up to above whatever loyalty is required, but the odds that he's going to be doing that are slim to none. So a resolved Great Henge is terrible for an Ugin. So, resolving an Ugin against mono green food, probably not going to do it. Mono green food also has things like Witch's Oven to sacrifice a Feasting Troll King so that they can get it back. You wipe the board with Ugin, they sacrifice their own Troll King, they get him in hand. Hopefully, they have 3 foods when they cast him the first time. Foods are colorless. You replay him, bing, bang, boom. So there's Dimir Rogues has counter spells. You counter an 8 mana spell, you're probably looking good for your next turn, especially if if you're playing negate. 2 mana to counter an 8 mana spell feels good. And then as far like removal, you've got Bloodchief's Thirst, which is 4 mana removal. Once he's resolved, obviously he has to resolve, and then you take care of him. So that kind of sucks, but there's a lot of ways to get rid of this card. And I really think it's aggro players that have a problem with him because he's just very powerful board wipe, and he's board wipe that exiles, which is just really great for board wipe purposes. Exiling the things that you destroy is always just feels that much better because you know that they can't come back in any fashion. So there's a lot of ways to play around. Crawling Barrens. Crawling Barrens, like, it turns into a creature on that player's turn, so it's not going to be a creature when your Ugin resolves, and it's colorless, so even if it was a creature for whatever reason, like, it wouldn't have mattered, right? Or is it colorless? I know that Nissa lands are colorless, so like when Ugin resolves, he hates to see those. But is Crawling Barrens technically a colorless creature? I know it turned Crawling Barrens. Crawling Barrens. Crawling Barrens becomes a 0/0 elemental creature until end of turn. So it doesn't say. I'm assuming it's the card it's colorless because the card is colorless. So he hates other colorless creatures, but I don't know how many decks are playing those. But in the current metagame, I'd say there's a lot of ways to play around an Ugin. So I don't think he's in a very great spot. The only place we're seeing Ugin in the current standard metagame is in the sideboard of mono green food. And I think that that's just an inclusion to fight the Yorion decks, really. It's just another card to help their matchup against Yorion. Which even, do they really want or care? And really, in most lists, you see 1 or 2 Ugins in the sideboard. So it's like, is it like, do they even really need it, or are they just improving their matchup that much more by including him? And I think they're just improving their matchup that much more. He's kind of like an emergency break, or kind of like an emergency card. If they're in dire straits, you can wipe the board and destroy a Yorion player's turn and something like that. But even then, if they sideboard in counter spells, if it's a Yorion deck not playing counter spells, and then they beat you, and then you sideboard in an Ugin, then they're going to sideboard in counter spells, so you have to account for that. So I almost say, like, you lose to Yorion, you win. You lose to Yorion Doom Foretold. You win with Ugin the next round, and then I'd say on game 3 you sideboard them out because they're going to put counter spells in. Or maybe you leave them in. I don't really know. Maybe you leave them in and you hope that they have to counter your early spells, or maybe you just hope that they... I would sideboard them out because I feel like they would hold counter spells not to use on your creatures, to wait for and they would be waiting for the Ugin to resolve, and then you just attack with creatures, and then their counter spells just are dead in their hand, and you resolve a Kogla because they're holding on to that counter spell, waiting for the Ugin the next turn or whatever. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy, but I'd say that this is a fair and balanced card, and I don't think that. I think there are a lot of ways to. It's a very powerful card. It is maybe like slightly more powerful than it needs to be. Does the +2 ability have to be a +2? Could it be a -1? Well, I guess it would be impossible for him to -10 then, but like, could they have done a little rework to make it a bit more fair? Sure, but I don't think it's. I wouldn't say it's unfair. Is it a little bit powerful? is a little bit more powerful than it needs to be, maybe. But I think there are a lot of ways to play around it, and especially in the current metagame, there are so many different ways that this gets outclassed. So, and if there, if there's a current meta, or if there's a current format being played where this isn't particularly the best card because it's very easily played around, then I think that's a sign of a healthy format and of a card that is balanced. If this is only seeing play in the sideboard of a few decks, then I don't think I don't think that this is a card that's broken. I mean, look at the current standard or the historic metagame. You have Uro being played. I mean, Uro is present in a lot of the decks being played in the Zendikar Rising Championships coming up, and I think that those decks are only really powerful because he's in those decks. I think those decks would be formidable without him, but nowhere near as good as they are with him. And you don't see decks that are super popular because of Ugin. You don't see, a sign that Uro is broken is because people are playing those decks, and I think that they're playing those decks because, Uro. People are playing the Uro decks, the Sultai mid-range, 4-color mid-range decks. They're being played because Uro is in the deck. You also have Nissa, but Uro is a huge contributor as well. And you don't see decks being played because of Ugin, is my point. So that's a sign that the card isn't broken, is pretty fair, and can be easily played around. Uro is much harder. I mean, Uro has its predators and has ways to be played around, but the card itself generates value immediately and stuff like that, and can be countered, but also goes to the graveyard. You get it. Uro is a very great card and is kind of a broken card. This card is maybe a little bit more powerful than it needs to be, but is not broken. So that's kind of my take. I think it is a fair and balanced card. Might be a little bit too powerful, but it is played. It can be played around pretty sufficiently to make it not broken. So yeah, that's my take. Ugin is a card I actually personally like. I have it in my mono white control or mono white prison deck. I think it's a cool card. I mean, look at that. I think the art is just beautiful. Especially the new, like, the full art that they made where his, like, wing kind of comes out and around the card and stuff. You kind of see the feathers coming out and around. I thought that was fucking cool. Yeah. So overall, very I'm happy with it in the metagame. I think I think that the reprint wasn't a bad idea. I think people gripe about it for the wrong reasons. And if you're playing an aggro deck and you just get trounced by an Ugin, maybe just put something in the sideboard for him. Or you just gotta play faster. Don't let him get to 8 mana. You gotta finish him before they get there. If your opponent gets to 8 mana and you're playing aggro, you're probably not in a great spot anyway. You really want to end those games as fast as possible. So if you're playing the kind of aggro that loses that hard to Ugin. Obviously, Gruul doesn't mind as much, but Gruul also could end the game faster. I don't know. I'm rambling at this point, but Ugin, good card. We'll leave it there.